Assalamu alaikum. I guess it's not the one working. Assalamu alaikum. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So, inshallah, today I'm going to be talking about a very special woman. It's not Aisha, but someone very, very special. There are some women whose resolve you can't shake. They are strengthened by Allah and submit to nothing except for Him. And so even the greatest tyrant cannot break them or make them give up their faith. Ashiya, the wife of Fir'aun, was one such woman. Her strength and her status will forever remain an example for all of mankind. She was a woman who never allowed herself to be defined or limited by her painful circumstances. Instead, she carried in her such a deep faith and knowledge of who she really was that she was willing to die for what she believed in. It was perhaps for this reason that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ mentioned her as one of the greatest women of all time. One day, he was sitting with his companions and he drew 4 lines. And then he asked, "Do you know what this is?" And they replied, "Allah and His Messenger know best." He said that the best of the women of paradise are Khadija, daughter of Khuwaylid, Fatima, daughter of Muhammad, Ashiya, daughter of Mazahim, the wife of Fir'aun, and Maryam, daughter of Imran. And this is Sahih Ahmad. Now, Ashiya's story begins in Egypt, where she lived with her husband Fir'aun, the greatest tyrant of all time. After being told by a fortune teller that he was going to be overtaken by a man from Bani Israel, the children of Israel, Fir'aun gave orders that every other year the male babies would have to be executed. The Quran describes this horrific life of Bani Israel when it says what's translated as, "And remember, we delivered you from the people of Pharaoh. They set you hard tasks and punishments, slaughtered your sons, and let your women live. Therein was a tremendous trial from your Lord." And this is Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 49. So when Musa alayhi salam was born, his mother feared for his life. But Allah assured her that he would be safe and told her to place him in a boat on the Nile. The Quran tells us what's translated as, "And we inspired to mother of Musa, saying, suckle him, but when you fear for him, then cast him into the river and fear not, nor grieve. Verily, we shall bring him back to you and shall make him one of our messengers." And this is chapter 28, verse 7. And just as Allah had promised, Musa came safely to the shore, where he was found by Ashiya. Ashiya then convinced her husband to keep the child. Allah tells us, "Then the household of Fir'aun picked him up, that he might become for them an enemy and a cause of grief. Verily, Fir'aun, Haman, and their hosts were sinners, and the wife of Pharaoh said, 'A comfort of the eye for me and for you. Kill him not, perhaps he may be of benefit for us, and we may adopt him as a son.' And they perceived not the result of that." This is also in Surah Al-Qasas, verses 8 to 9. So Musa grew under that protection of Ashiya, in the house of Fir'aun. Musa grew to be a great prophet who called his people to the worship of one God. But because of the oppression of Fir'aun, many people did not believe in him. He would threaten people. He had gathered all of his henchmen, and Fir'aun had announced, "Ana rabbukumul a'la." He had announced that, "I am your Lord most great." and he threatened anyone who tried to not believe in him as the one true Lord. And what happened was, for example, when the magicians believed in the message of Musa, Fir'aun threatened them with a great penalty. He threatened to cut off their limbs, their hands and their feet from opposite sides, and then crucify them on tree trunks. So this was the punishment that he had given to those who believed. Yet despite this persecution, Ashiya believed in Musa's message, and she held firm to her faith. That faith was so strong that she was willing to die for it. When Fir'aun found out that she believed, he tortured her severely. But her belief in God was so strong that it made her an everlasting symbol. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran what is translated as, God sets forth an example for those who believe, the wife of Fir'aun, who said, my Lord, build for me with you a house in paradise, and save me from Fir'aun and his doings, and save me from an unjust people. Now think about this. Ashiya was a queen. She was the wife of one of the most powerful men to walk the earth. She lived a life of unparalleled luxury and wealth. And yet, Ashiya knew that her true home was in paradise. She had no attachment to this life. Now, there are a lot of lessons we can learn from Ashiya's life, and from this in particular. But one of the really beautiful lessons is, for me particularly, one of the most beautiful lessons of her story is the fact that despite all the persecution that she was going through, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy on her, so much so that when she was being tortured, she actually smiled. And the reason why she smiled was because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered her dua and allowed her to actually see her home in Jannah. And the reason why I find this particularly moving is because if Allah is with you, even your hardest struggles can become light. If you can see your home with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Jannah, no matter what you're going through in this life, it can become easy. And what better example of that than this woman who's being tortured by the worst man ever to walk the earth. And yet she was able to bear it and even smile, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was with her and he made it easy for her. And she had a greater attachment to her home in Jannah than to her home here. And because of that, everything that she dealt with, regardless of how difficult it was made easy for her. The second lesson, which I think is very important, is that she was married to a very tyrannical man who claimed to be the Lord, right? And yet she was not defined by him. Although he was her husband, and although that was her circumstance, she was not defined or limited by those circumstances. Now, this is an important lesson for us, because all of us will have different different things in life that are thrown at us. And the question is, what are we going to define our self-worth by? And so, we go through society, and society tells you that you're supposed to get your self-worth, if you're a woman, by the way you look, usually, by how many people think you're attractive, by how thin you are. There's different places you're supposed to get your self-worth. But that's one of the places that society teaches women to get their self-worth. And as men, they're told, a lot of times they're supposed to get their self-worth by status, by wealth, how powerful you are. The point here is that our self-worth should only come from one relationship, only one relationship, and that's the relationship with our Creator. That our relationship with our Creator should define how we feel about ourselves and define who we are. And for Ashiya, that's how it was. It was her relationship with her Creator. It wasn't her relationship with the tyrannical person that she happened to live with, or by her circumstances. In the story of Ashiya is an everlasting example of a woman who chose the hereafter over all of the glitter of this world. It is a story of a woman whose love for Allah and the home with Him was greater. It's a story of a woman whose faith inspired her to take on the greatest tyrant of all time and to give her life in the process. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم. سبحانك الله وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.